as I said to you, if you were here, I am under the weather. You can hear it. I have a sinus infection, so I'm going to keep the class relatively short. What I will do is I will direct you to a previous recording of a lecture on this, but I'm going to say a few things by way of introduction anyway, since I'm here. We're looking at Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and we've moved on from where we left off with Yeats's poems that are, I wouldn't say they're apocalyptic, but they lean in that direction. There's a sense that the progressivism of the Enlightenment and the Whig view of history, of the account of evolution and of improvement and of enlightenment and of human betterment, which has been pretty much the story of the whole 19th century, came to a crashing halt in the First World War. With the sinking of the Titanic, the unsinkable Titanic, maiden voyage, boom, hits a big iceberg and goes to the bottom of the Atlantic. Some people have different theories on that, but still, it is. These are events and that have civilizational effects, and they seem to have those in Europe. And after the First World War ended and the financial consequences of the First World War set in, the so-called Roaring Twenties was the case in the United States, but it was not the case in Germany. In Germany, we had the Weimar Republic, which was a regime accompanied by mass hyperinflation and poverty in Germany, and a great deal of resentment. And in every European country, large numbers of men had been killed. There were factories. There was still a commitment to eugenics. So eugenics was alive and well, and we'll see that in this novel, Brave New World, that's one of the main things of interest to Huxley, is the eugenics movement. And a future that is predicated on the idea of using the state to get behind eugenics research to create a better society. And at the same time, in the 20s, as they gave way to the 30s, there are signs that Germany is not going to be satisfied with its state, and the rest of the world is not really escaping the consequences of the First World War either. So in the mid-1930s, we get the Great Depression sets in. So, and I think that it is not disconnected from the First World War, although the war makes many people rich. It's also created industries and structural imbalances, and then you have the rise of communism in the East, Russia under Stalin and so forth. That's the backdrop for Huxley's Brave New World, published in 1931. Actually, he wrote it in 31, he published it in 32. And he posits a futuristic world state. That speculation on a future world state is probably a reflection on an entity that emerges after the First World, which is called the League of Nations, which is the precursor for the modern UN. Woodrow Wilson, the American president, convenes a meeting with various world leaders, and in order to avoid another world war, they decide a League of Nations is necessary, and they are proposing something in the direction of a world government, so that they don't get drawn in through the treaties and so forth that precipitated the First World War. How do we avoid this going forward? That's it. Huxley, who is writing about this idea of a one world government, is thinking about the consequences of eugenics coupled with a globalist vision. And it's almost surprising coming from him. And let me say something about why I say it's surprising. He comes from a long line of a very famous British family. I've put something of the family tree on the board behind me here. The patriarch is a zoologist by the name of Thomas Henry Huxley, T.H. Huxley, 1825 to 1895. This man was famous in his day, often called Darwin's bulldog, because Darwin's Evolution of the Species needed a publicist. Darwin himself is attributed with the theory of evolution, but Huxley was a populist of that theory. And this is Aldous Huxley's grandfather. His other grandson, Aldous's brother, is Julian Huxley, also an evolutionary biologist, and as it says here, interestingly, the first director of UNESCO. In case you don't know what UNESCO is. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. In other words, it is a one world government. So when Huxley is reflecting on the significance of globalist politics and eugenic technologies, especially related to reproductive technology, he's thinking about things that are in the family. You can only imagine what the conversations were at the dinner table for the Huxley sons. As to the UNESCO doesn't come about for decades from here, but clearly there is within the Huxley family an idea that the technologies that we are employing and the eugenics that we are trying to harness has certain consequences for how we're going to have to organize society as well. And he reflects on those and thinks about them and then writes them as a novelist. So Huxley is a novelist. His brother's a scientist, his grandfather a scientist, and so forth. But he brings science in sync with the novel in a way that we have not yet seen. And so we get a genre of fiction that we're going to call a dystopian novel. Now, do you know what a dystopian novel is? It's an odd word. It's a made-up word. A made-up word from another made-up word. The first made-up word is a utopia, a utopian novel. What's a utopian novel? Sure.
Fiction, perfect world.
Yeah, okay, more or less. It is a work first written by Thomas More in the 16th century called Utopia. And it literally means no place. And utopos, is a negation. It's a place that doesn't exist. But it's an imagined place. And not only an imagined place, an idealized imagined place. And sort of leaning in the direction of Plato's Republic, where what would be the ideal form of human government if it were organized in a way that that reason governed the will to control the appetites the way a person should. And he suggests the Republic. More's Utopia is a Christian version of that. What Huxley presents, and of course it's a futuristic place, it's not to be found here and now, but at some time in the future when things get better and better and better, it will be like a utopia. In the science fiction, the genre that emerges in the 19th century, and it does emerge in the 19th century, what we see is that very quickly some of the downsides of modern science emerge and are seized upon by the fiction writers. And I'm talking of everything from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein through Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which we read, to the fiction of H.G. Wells, First Men in the Moon, War of the Worlds, that sort of thing, a lot of which have been put into film. And we get the idea of the future as not an ideal version that science has given to us, but rather a sort of a nightmare scenario. Science being given the power of controlling human life and given it at a high level where where the scientists are in charge, seems to ignore moral considerations and even human beings in the mix. And that's already been anticipated by Jonathan Swift in A Modest Proposal, where he starts talking about in terms of utilities and numbers and the benefits of this. And while he's talking about the benefits, we, the audience, see the irony, because actually we're also aware of the terrible cost and the downside of that. That becomes more and more advanced over the course of time. It's even there in Heart of Darkness, where the idea of enlightenment and progress comes against a very dark backdrop, in which the reader is well aware of the scenario being rather a horror scenario. But the genre really takes off in Huxley, and the next writer we're going to look at, H.G. Wells. Not H.G. Wells. George Orwell. In 1984. We won't do Animal Farm, we'll do 1984. One final thing that connects the two, and as I say, I'll give over to the lecture I've already given on this because of my sinuses here and not try and plow through the whole thing, is that Huxley worked as a tutor in a private school, and his pupil was none other than George Orwell. So that's interesting. He worked in, where was it? I think it was Eton College, which is the private school of private schools in England. And where the aristocrats, the captains of industry, send their children to be educated. It's a boarding school. Often the King of England, the Queen of England, they send their children there to Eton College. That would be the normal expectation. And people from all over the British Empire also send their children there. So the Gandhi family will send their kids there, or whatever the equivalent is in those various nations. They send their children to a private British boarding school, and Eton College is the foremost of all of those. By the way, the most private schools in Britain are called the public schools. A little confusing for Canadians. The most private are called public school because they're being equipped for public service. That's why they're called public schools. That's their trajectory in life. You are the cream of the crop, and you are being prepared for public life. And Huxley, being part of his family, part of the Darwinist establishment in Britain, Darwinism associated, as we've already seen with later on, with eugenics, and with it, the improvement of the human race being led by the social and political elite, will be teaching at Eton College, and he will pass on this teaching to George Orwell, and Orwell will have a very different take on how this dystopian future will look than Huxley does. Huxley presents it in a way that I think almost seems unobjectionable. Or at least, let me put it differently. The people that he depicts are not unremittingly miserable. They seem happy. Whereas in Orwell's 1984, it seems like everybody's terrorized and terrified and being watched, and we have Big Brother and all that. So it's more obviously malevolent. Here it seems like people are happy with their lot in life, and in fact they're delighted. They're enjoying themselves a lot because they basically get sex on demand, and they get food on demand, and they're bred from the test tube to be a certain caste. So we'll have the alphas, the betas, the gammas, the epsilons, and so forth. And these people have been bred to do what they're doing, and they don't want to do anything other than they're doing. So they're totally satisfied in their lives. Certain tasks need to be done. And so it's classical conditioning that begins in the womb and goes all the way to death. Totally managed, controlled society. I actually don't think it's the greatest novel, although it's considered by readers one of the number 5 on the top 100 great novels of the 20th century. What's great about it is the ideas that it brings to the fore. Same thing with 1984, which I think is a better novel. But it is fascinating in the way that it anticipates contemporary problems. So in terms of a dystopian future, is it more likely that a nightmare scenario will happen with people's compliance, their willing compliance, or will it be against their interests? Will they be delighted into it, or will they be terrified into it? That's the disagreement between the two men. But both of them see the future as dystopian. Yes?
Could it be viewed that Huxley's reality rings a bell with Orwell's?
Yes, but that's not how it's portrayed in the novel. In the novels, they are mutually exclusive. They have a portrait of the future. Remember, it's a snapshot. It doesn't show the projection. When I say remember, you might not have read 1984 yet. 1984 presents a vision of the future in which variations on one world governments, there's actually 3 different governments that control the global population, and they have a history that is, it's talked about, but it lies, it's very much of what's happening in the present. It doesn't give you a long history of the institution. And it could have begun like Brave New World and it ended up like that. He's decided to focus on the horrific contemporary situation. Huxley likewise is focused on the contemporary situation. So you could say one comes before the other. It's possible. But neither of them look that way, and it doesn't entirely fit. Brave New World is much more involved in the control of life from the beginning to the end. The modern socialistic state, cradle to grave benefits, right? Social welfare. Things that sound an awful lot like the very sorts of things that are available in our day. The equivalent of Viagra. You know, they pop soma. It's something that leads to enhanced sexual activity. Everyone pops soma. They offer it on little trays, and oh, that's great. And there's no moral qualms. There's no moral discussions in Brave New World. The line, by the way, and this connects with the utopian theme, is taken from Shakespeare's The Tempest, Act 5, Scene 1. When Miranda talks about the creatures around her and says, "Oh, wonder how many goodly creatures are there here, how beauteous mankind is. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it." So he's directly quoting from Shakespeare. Shakespeare will also figure in Brave New World. It'll be one of the works that's not read, interestingly, in the realm of the civilized people. The civilized people have no interest in art. They have no interest in anything other than mundane bodily comforts. No interest in culture, no interest in history, no interest in art. All such things have been consigned to the people who are the barbarians, which is interesting. So again, this is Huxley commentary here. Any comments or questions? I'm not going to go further down the road to talk about Huxley too much now, or Brave New World, because I'm going to give you a little bit of Huxley talking about technology, because this novel is as much about technology and its role in a dystopia. And I think it's a helpful thing to listen to. But yes, first, and then.
Was Huxley Christian?
No. And neither was Orwell. It's really interesting. I don't deal with it here on the course, but the writers that dominate the 20th century, and in the list of the top 100 books, they are almost overwhelmingly bleak in their outlook. They're almost all either agnostics or atheists, with a couple of exceptions. And the couple of exceptions are ones that are known to all Christians, or C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. They hew a very different line as far as their view on the contemporary situation. And interestingly, both men present a sort of a historic form of fiction that's simultaneously making contemporary commentary and also seems to have futuristic implications. So it's a take on the genre. The next year I offer a course called Science Fiction and Subcreation, and it's C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien's response to their culture and to men like Huxley and Orwell, whom they would have known perhaps personally, but certainly they were in the same circles. By the way, Huxley died the same day that C.S. Lewis did. Which is interesting. November 22nd, 1963. Yes?
The last name of the main character is Marx.
Yes.
And obviously this is in
31.
1932.
32 is published, yeah.
So there isn't the fear of communism like there is in the late 1900s, but it definitely is still there. Would he consider that to be part of his audience's world?
He's thinking about that because the other book that he writes, or at least Eric Blair, is Animal Farm. So an Animal Farm is most obviously a take on Stalinist Russia. And I think they're both concerned about the English aristocracy are concerned about Marxism and thinking about what's going on in Eastern Europe at this time. And so I think it is there, for sure. And a totally managed, organized society, because the USSR calls itself scientific socialism. Like they think that it is science being applied to human life, and there's an equality motive. Men and women will both work. They'll have equal status. They'll call each other comrade, and that sort of stuff. The sort of language that you get in Brave New World. They speak of each other as comrades. The only difference between is these comrades have sex with one another, not necessarily in the Soviet Union in that same way. But there's a sense of the differences between the two sexes, and the idea of a family has been abolished. That's another interesting thing about Brave New World, is that sex has no procreative dimensions. If you want children, then you go to the factory to hatch them, so that you get the outcome that you want. You don't get any defective human beings. Like, to have children by getting pregnant is regarded as barbaric. And even the words that refer to that person, a mother or father, those have been removed from the lexicon, more or less. They know the words, but people they sort of recoil with disgust. You actually bore a child? And how barbaric. That's what happens where the barbarians live, where they read Shakespeare. And you get a sense that Huxley prefers the barbarians within that. But at the same time, you asked if he was a Christian, maybe because of that. It sounds like he's very critical of this, and it sounds like he's in favor of something like natural law, where a family is the normal human entity, the sort of foundation of all lawful government. But he doesn't go down a religious angle for it. There's a criticism there, but it's not particularly, doesn't have much by way of teeth. Yes?
He seems to pitch Christianity in a tone of sarcasm from the person who's speaking.
Yes.
Which kind of suggests, at least to me, that he's advocating for the benefits of Christianity as an antidote to the current.
The British establishment has a very ambivalent view about Christianity. They don't believe it's true. They think it's a myth. They think it's tradition. And they think that it has some very useful functions. But do we actually believe in it? No, we don't. They prefer a sort of enlightened humanism. I believe that Julian Huxley is the head of the Humanist Society. Humanism, Huxley. Yeah. What did he believe? Emergent evolution and so forth. Synthesis of genetic and population, consensus reigning in biology from about 1940, which is still broadly tenable. What is this? The most formative episode in the history of evolutionary biology was the establishment of the neo-Darwinian synthesis. So they just sort of, but it's the humanist society. It's furthering the human interests without appeal to religion at all. Although humanism is a form of religion, it's a religious belief in man, and man's directing of man's goods, creaturely goods, spiritual goods. So it sounds like it's a critique. And it is a critique, and it's mockery, and it's an ambivalent thing. So when Huxley is writing this, he is not on one of the two sides. You see a bit of him in each of the sides here. He's seeing them that way. But don't see him as entirely supporting the barbarians either. He just sees the negative aspects of a humanistic, eugenically managed society. So in other words, he has a little bit by way of critical faculties, which we rarely see these days. People who can see the problems with their positions. Anyway, other questions or comments here? The other thing that he writes, I should say, one final thing, he is philosophically interested and writes about what he calls, and this is a book in 1945, what he calls the perennial philosophy, which is a fusion of Western and Eastern mysticism, and he uses psychedelic drugs to achieve it. That's Aldous Huxley. And you'll see a bit of that here in Brave New World as well. So he is interested in spirituality, but not religion. And we saw that already a bit with our Irish friend Yeats. A mystical, spiritual inclination, even amongst the humanists, that rejects formal religion and theological dogma, but is very interested in spirituality and is willing to explore it through drugs and so forth. Very common amongst the elite in this period. Yes? The book... Aldous Huxley? Yeah. Perhaps. I can't recall that. I can't recall. But he's very interested in spirituality, so it would not surprise me if he did. I think he might be right. But I can't recall that. Anyway, so it's not a Christian critique. Christianity is mocked, but so is the future of a world government with eugenics as its mandate as well. There's also a critique within the camp, as it were, but there's not a genuine critique, let alone an alternative being presented. All future outcomes are dark. But will we recoil from them and be terrified of that future, or will we be running towards that future because we're delighted in it? Huxley thinks that everyone's going to want that future and at the same time dislike it. So we're running into the into the honey trap, as it were. I'll stop there and I'll play this little recording and